Okay, so now that we have saved our favorite teams inside of our state, we have the ability to get and set all of the teams, the counts, the active divisions, the conferences. Let's go ahead and build our favorites page. That way we can view which teams we have favorited. So the first thing I'd like to do is go to our layout, and I'd like to add a couple things to our layout. The first thing I'd like to add is a little message to the user that says, hey, the last request you did was to add a team, and your team was in fact added successfully. So I have a header here, and let's actually do that inside the header. So I have NFL teams in the header with an H1. So the first thing I'd like to do is not do that. So if you'd like to put a comment here, I want to show any messages I have in my temp data here. Show any messages from temp data. So what I can do is do an @if, and I can say if my temp data, and I called it message, if that's not null, so if you try to access that and there's something in it, go ahead and display it. So let's go ahead and say the class, I'm going to show up green, so I'm going to go ahead and say success, okay, and I'm going to show temp data message. Okay, so if there is something there, display it. And I believe this needs to be in double quotes since it's C# code. Okay, so now if there is a message, display it. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is show a link to our favorites page. So go ahead and say link to favorites page in header. So what I'm going to do is another if using our razor syntax. And the first thing I want to do is make sure we're not on the favorites page. So if our view context .view .path .contains favorites. So if it doesn't contain favorites, essentially we're not on the favorites page. I'm going to go ahead and get some of the information from our session. So session equals new NFL session. Go ahead and pass in the context .session. And then show some information here from our favorites. So let's go ahead and show it in a header 5. Let's show it as an information background. Okay. Let's then go ahead and show it anchor to our favorites page. So the controller will be equal to favorites, so it needs to look for our favorites controller. The action should be index. And then let's go ahead and give it a text color. Okay, and let's say my favorite teams. And then let's also put in a badge for how many favorite teams we have favorited currently. So let's say inside of a span, let's go ahead and get one of the badges from Bootstrap, badge light, and then say using our razor syntax, I'm going to say session.get my team count. Get team count. Okay. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and build our favorites controller, and we'll also need to build a favorites view. So let's go inside of controllers, add a new file, favorites controller.cs. Let's go ahead and put a namespace. It will be NFL teams.controllers, public class favorites controller, and that should extend controller. Let's go ahead and add in the using statement for our controller, ASP.NET Core MVC. Okay, and then we'll also need public, let's just say for now, iActionResult index. And then return a view. All right, so we can return a view now from our favorites controller. Let's go ahead and add a folder for our view. So we have a home. So let's go to our views folder, new folder, favorites. And then inside of that, let's go ahead and say new file, index.cshtml. Okay. So to save a little time on building the view, let's just go ahead and use the view that's given to us from the PowerPoint. Okay, so going through the view for a second, we have a title here in our Razor syntax at the top. It's called favorites. And then we have our favorites that will then, we can delete a favorite, we can clear our favorites. And then here is how those favorite teams will be displayed in our model.teams. Okay, and that's using the team list view model. So it's using the view model from our main index page to display all of our favorite teams here in the favorites page. So it looks like we need a delete action to where we can clear all of our favorites, and also a back to home page action. So it looks like it uses our home index, so we don't need that, but we do need one for delete, for clear favorites. So let's go back to our favorites controller. So we'll need an HTTP post action, public, and then once we clear all of our favorites, there will be no need to be on the favorites page anymore. So let's redirect to action result delete, since that's the action name. Okay. So if we remember, we built that method in our session to clear it. So let's go ahead and work with our session object. New NFL session. I'll probably need to include the using statement, HTTP context dot session. Let's go ahead and include this from the models namespace. We can say session dot remove my teams. Let's go ahead and put a message in the temp data that we put inside of the layout. That way the user knows that we cleared their teams successfully. Okay, equals favorites, favorite teams cleared. And then let's go ahead and redirect to our home page. Redirect to action, index. I want to return to the index action of the home controller. And then if I do know we already set our conference, let's go ahead and get the conferences and division from the session. So we can say active conference equals session dot get active conference. and the active division will be equal to session.getActiveDivision. Okay. And I needed a return statement here. Forgot that. So now we should have a way to clear our active favorites. So let's actually go through and return back our teams from our session here. So again, we'll need to work with our session object, new NFL session, pass in the HTTP context session. And we're going to build our view model from that. So then I can say var view model equals new teams list view model. Go ahead and use an object initializer here. The active conference I'll get from the session. Really, I'll get all of this information from the session. Equals session.getActiveConference. The active division equals session.getActiveDivision. And the teams that are my favorite teams equals session.get my teams. Go and put a semicolon at the end, and I'll pass the view model to the view. Okay, so I should have a button to get here, and I should have my view. It's using the view model, favorites controller. Let me make sure I have everything before I run it. It says one unsaved. Let's go ahead and save it all. Maybe it's just this index. Okay. So I believe that's everything. Let's go ahead and run it. Looks like I'm missing something here. Session has not been configured. You know what? I didn't put anything in the startup CS file. All right, let's go ahead back to the startup and do the first thing I should have done all along. Okay, so if we remember in the PowerPoint, I already added Newtonsoft.json here. So in my configure services, let's go ahead and say services.add memory cache, so I can cache anything in my application, as well as services.add session. So I'm sitting here trying to use session, but I've not configured my application to use session. So also, let's go ahead down here. Before I use my endpoints, I can say app.use session. Okay, let's go ahead and try to run it again. All right, so now I have my favorite teams. That's 0 right now. Let's go ahead and try to add a favorite team. Oh man, and it's broken. All right, I must be missing something. Let's stop running it. Let's stop. What am I missing? So I clicked on the team. Let me see where it broke at. Let's go to controllers. So I clicked on the team and I can't get to the team. So it doesn't look like the details page is working. /home/details. I think I removed that method. And when I removed that method, did I break something? Let me go ahead and close a lot of this out. Go back to my home controller. And I remember moving this details method. It might be because I still have a get attribute on it. Let me try to remove the get attribute. Now it looks like it can't find an image. That's a weird exception. I didn't remove any images. Details, CSHTML, line 12. All right. Let's go to details, line 12, which I'm assuming it just tries to go to that image. All right, let me pause the video and see what's going on. Okay, so it looks like the issue was before I had to model bind a lot of the stuff before we used the session, and now I don't need to do that. If you remember, I removed that method, and so it was passing back a null team ID because I removed the method, so I'm no longer using this this way to return back or model bind and have an entire model on my method parameter. So essentially what I needed to do, let's go ahead and uncomment this. Let me just remove this altogether, actually. So this is what I had. Let me go ahead and, no. Okay, so I don't need these. And since I'm not model binding it, I really don't need to have the form or the button. Instead, what I want to do is just an ASP action. So let me get rid of the form and the button. Let me try to reformat this a little better. And now I have a line item, which I'll keep the line item, and instead I want an anchor with an ASP action. That's going to go to the details route, and I'm going to put on the ASP route an ID, which will be equal to the team.team ID. Team.team ID. Let's go ahead and close that. Let's move this down to here. Go ahead and again format this a little better. Okay, so now we should be using, for each team that's in my model.team, so it's displaying all of my teams, I'm now attaching the team ID to the route attributes, so when I go to details, it should then pass the team ID that I want to add, that I want to go to in my details view. So if I go to my home controller details view, it should pass that ID now here as a parameter. So let's go ahead and try to run that, and that should fix it. All right, so now I have it here. So you can see I have that ID now. If you look at the bottom of my screen, /home/details/buff, let's go there. There's my team, and there's now my add to favorites button. I want to go ahead and add that team to my favorites. And now they have been added to my favorites. And now I can go to my favorite teams here that will use the favorites controller and get those teams from my session and paint those on a page. So you can see I'm using this badge here. If I add another team and add to favorites, it'll then add that team to my session. Let's go ahead and go to the page now. And I can view the two of my favorite teams here, clear the favorites, go back to my home page, and now all of that information is in my session. So I hope this video series on state and session was helpful, and this helps you in building your web pages and not losing valuable information when you need to go back and get it later on. So I'll see you in the next video series. Thanks.